What's up, guys? I'm back with another video today. I wanted to address one of the comments one of you guys left on my video. Isaiah Davis says, lots of great advice. I would enjoy a video covering interview tips. So let's talk interviewing. Now, obviously, because I worked in tech and a lot of the content that I've created on this channel revolves around tech, I'm going to kind of be a little bit more biased towards tech interviewing. But in general, I think all of this advice applies to wherever you're interviewing. And it's kind of more the general advice. So I'm not going to get into, here are the JavaScript questions you might get. Here are the algorithm, like none of that stuff. We're going to talk about the specific tips that can apply to any interview. So here we go. All right, so let's start with the obvious stuff. Now, I shouldn't have to say a lot of this because it is obvious, but you read around online, you hear stories in real life, and you start to lose a little hope. So I have to address some of this stuff. The first one, show up early. Like, obviously, don't be there right at 10 o'clock if the interview's at 10 o'clock. Get there early, go to the bathroom, get everything ready, obvious stuff. Shower, brush your teeth, be presentable. I mean, honestly, you want to give a good first impression. So be clean, look like somebody you want to work with on a day-to-day basis. Don't be some disgusting slob. Bring your resume and a notepad. You should be there to take some notes if anything comes up during the interview. And just in case they didn't get the chance to print out your resume, it's good to have it on hand. And finally, it's crazy that I have to say this, but if your parents feel the need to get involved in any way, stop telling them so much about your life. You have to set a boundary, like get them out of your professional life. It's fine if they give you advice, but when I see these stories online about parents calling employers, wanting some feedback, or parents showing up to the stop. Do not do that. That would be an immediate no if I were in a hiring position. If their parents reached out to me, immediate no. All right, so now let's talk about timing. And the reason timing is important is because you want the odds to be in your favor as much as possible. And what this means is that you can't come across as desperate. You need to be in a position where you can speak your mind, let the interview go the way it needs to go without feeling like, if I don't get this job, I'm screwed. So what that means is the best time to look for a job is when you already have a job. It's the best time to do it because there's no pressure. If the job interview goes poorly, well, you still have a paycheck. You're still good. And this will allow you to be more aggressive in the interview, to ask the questions you might not ask if you were kind of on the fence. Am I going to get this job? Am I not? I don't want to, come across as too aggressive or ask some questions that might put them into a difficult position where they don't want to answer the question. All of these things you can do when you already have a job in place. So timing is pretty important. Make that a consideration if you're considering interviewing for a job. This one's very important, and it took me a few years until it really settled in with me. And that's that you need to sell yourself. So many people, when they go into an interview, it's like they're just waiting. It's an interrogation. Okay, what are you going to ask me? Hopefully I have the answer. And that's just the way it goes. An interview should be you selling yourself, like making it perfectly clear to them why they would be an absolute idiot to pass on you for the job. So one way to sell yourself is to not restrict yourself to the work environment. If they're asking you certain questions, like, give me an example of a time when you failed, like what did you learn from it? So many people will immediately jump to their last job or a job they had a few years ago. They always try to come up with work-related examples. Now, if you give an example that isn't work-related and they ask for one, then obviously give it to them. But don't go in with the assumption that you need to give a work-related answer. So for the give me an example of a time where you failed and what did you learn from it, I wouldn't necessarily jump to a past employer or anything like that. I would come up with something like, well, I self-published a book on Angular and I had a goal to hit 10,000 sales. Unfortunately, I didn't hit it. And what I learned from that was that I waited entirely too long to start my marketing. I was a little too focused on the product. I was so focused on the writing as opposed to marketing and trying to find whether or not there was interest in this. And what this does is, one, it answers the question, but two, it shows them like, hey, I do work outside of work. I have my own projects that I'm doing. I have to do a lot of things when I'm doing those projects. I'm writing, I'm doing marketing, I'm doing coding, I'm finding platforms to sell this on. Like, there's a lot of different things you have to learn when you're doing something as simple as self-publishing a book. All of that stuff is valuable information, and it might get a conversation going where they're like, what marketing did you try to do? What would you do next time? What self-publishing platform did you choose and why? All of these things will start a conversation and allow them to start digging into you as a person, rather than just going through their list of questions, which doesn't do much for you. Finally, if you want a book recommendation, I would really recommend reading Grant Cardone's Sell or Be Sold. This is the book that changed the way I interviewed forever, and it really just came down to him illustrating how important it is to be able to sell yourself. If you're working at a company and you're trying to convince them to go with this framework over that framework, well, when you're having that internal discussion, you're selling. You're trying to sell your solution over their solution. So you're always going to be selling. It's a very valuable skill to learn, and that is a fantastic book to learn how to sell. Telling stories. It's eventually going to come up. They're going to ask you for some work-related example or some event from your past that gives them a better look at you. And one of the things I really struggled with, especially when I was just coming out of college, whenever they would ask me these questions, like, tell me about a time you were on a team and you had a really difficult teammate, something like that. It was difficult soon after college because so many of my examples came from the same class or came from the same job. So I would have 3 different stories, but it all came from one team, one job. And one of my teachers, I brought this up. I'm like, I feel like it's going to sound weird in an interview if I just keep going back to the same team, the same job. She said, skip the details. Like, stop adding so much detail. Stop saying during my senior year on my senior project. She's like, just say, I was on a team once. There was this one team member. So if the details aren't relevant to your story, if the details aren't relevant to the takeaway from the story, don't add them. That dreaded end of the interview question. Are there any questions you have for us? So many people hate this because they feel like they're just coming up with some garbage questions, or the questions they really want to ask, they can't ask. My advice here is interview like you're an investor. Literally flip the table and interview them. Now, this is easier to do the smaller the company is. If you're working at a startup or interviewing at a startup, it's way easier to do this than if you're working at like Netflix or Amazon. But assume you had $100,000 to invest in a company. What would you want to know? Like, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Who are their biggest competitors? What new industries could they possibly enter? Can their product or service be targeted to a new market or industry? What technical breakthroughs could impact the company's product or service? You need to think like an investor, because then you can start to ask questions about their business rather than just, well, what's your company culture like? What's your vacation policy? That's all just, it's on the job application. You need to get into this company and figure out whether or not they're worth your time. And if all you're looking for is a paycheck, then ignore this. But if you want to know, like, is this company good for me long term? Then you have to ask questions like you're an investor. And the one time I did this at the smallest, earliest stage startup I've ever interviewed at, they were blown away. Like, when I left that interview, they gave me an offer. And then when I started working there, they were like, by the way, dude, we've never had questions like that from anybody. It actually made us kind of rethink some of the things we're doing. Those are the questions you need to ask. So literally pretend like you're a shark on Shark Tank and dissect their business, dissect their industry, give them the impression or let them know that you're not just a designer, you're not just a coder. You think about business and you're thinking about their business in the bigger picture. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you're desperate, you're not going to want to be as aggressive here. Maybe show them that you're thinking about the bigger picture, but just leave it there. But if you're not desperate and you really want to know, like, should I give all my hours to this startup where I might be working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week? Like, I need to know that this is where I want to work. Get aggressive with these questions and get so aggressive that you're kind of bordering on the verge of maybe getting kicked out of the interview or offending them, because that's going to really tell you what this company is about. If they get super defensive, then you're finding issues in their company. If they're just like, yeah, let's talk about this, then you know they either have issues that they're fully aware of or they have a pretty good company culture. So stuff like, what do you hate about your job? Like literally asking that question. What's the worst part about working here? Because there has to be something bad. What's your company's biggest weakness? Again, more important the earlier they are, but dig into that. Like, what are you guys scared of? Is there a big company that could just build what you built on the side and then just take over that market? Or is this something that can easily be copied? And if that happens, you guys are kind of screwed. Dig into stuff like that. Another one that I asked that got a really good response was assume there's another company that does exactly what you do. What is it about your company that sets it apart from the identical competitor? And how would you sell this difference to an interested investor? Those are the kinds of questions that really show you a lot about the company, especially if you're interviewing somebody higher up in the company. I was with like the CEO, CTO at the time. But when I asked a question like that, they didn't get defensive about it. They brought up all their competitors. They brought up the strengths they had. They brought up, yeah, we've had to address this with investors. So really good question. These are the types of questions you need to be asking. And based on their response, based on how they're replying to you, based on their level of interest, do they want to keep talking about this? Or are they like, quick answer, let's move on? That tells you everything you need to know about the company. So ask those questions if you're not too desperate. So yeah, there's my interviewing tips. Like I said, I wanted to keep it a little bit general, so it's not just specifically about technical interviews or getting into the nitty-gritty details that might not apply to whatever industry you're in. But the reality is, when it comes down to it, you have to get comfortable interviewing. You have to get comfortable being under pressure. So get out there, interview. There might be some mock interview sites out there somewhere. I'm not sure. That might be worthwhile, or even just do the interview by yourself. Like ask those questions and just practice saying them out loud. Don't practice answering questions for the first time, like literally right in front of them. Just the act of saying the answers out loud, even if you're by yourself, will help. So hopefully this video helped. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you have any ideas or requests for future videos, you're also welcome to leave a comment below. So like this video if you liked it and consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.